All
Well,
right,
we're staying with
taking
our theme
notes.
with jobs. As Dave was mentioning, the June jobs report coming out Friday, while some metrics are forecasted to be promising, though. Now, others are expected to be less so. And while the hurdles of the current job market affect all workers, women, and particularly those of color, are often disproportionately impacted by them. Well, joining us now to shed some light on these labor issues is Pipeline CEO Katica Roy. Katica, good to have you back. So, as we look at some of these trends, specifically the ones that are affecting women, when we look at things like taking time off, if you're a woman, you take perhaps a few years off, I was surprised to find just how much that does affect your earning power.
Yeah, it does impact your earning power as well as your ability to get back into the labor force in the future at either the same level or to continue to move forward. I think the real concern that we have is that today's unemployment claims were the highest that they've been since January. We also have seen a softening of the jobs market, particularly for Black women and Latinas last month. And that is on the heels of the jobs report tomorrow that we expect to be the worst since December 2020. So that's a real concern in terms of women's employment, which, by the way, still has not recovered since before the pandemic.
I wanted to ask you about that in particular, Katica. What was the true impact on females, on women in the workforce of the pandemic?
Well, initially, we actually, so let me just take a step back and talk about why it matters from an economic perspective. So from 1970 to 2016, women actually added $2 trillion to the US economy through their increased labor force participation. We lost almost all of that progress during the pandemic. Now, we have recovered some of it. However, if you look as of the last jobs report, there are still 600,000 women missing from the labor force, and they are still at almost 750,000 jobs deficit since the beginning of the pandemic. So this is not only an issue of fairness, it's also an issue of economic growth. And as we talk about the recession and overturning of Roe v. Wade, those again put additional pressures on the economic growth from equity in the labor force.
And I do want to ask you, because even in terms of the recession disproportionately affecting women, typically the first to lose their jobs during the recession and then the last to gain them back. If you see that women do have this economic impact in the workforce, why do you think that is the case, that women are then the first to get laid off in situations like this?
It's biases. I mean, it goes to the first question that you asked about, right? Which is this motherhood penalty. So we have this assumption that moms are less committed to their jobs because they are mothers. And in actual fact, what the research shows is that women are working mothers working in the paid labor force, because all mothers work, are actually the most committed and most productive employees over the course of their career. So where you actually want to put your investment from a labor force perspective is in working moms.
We recently, Katica, had Texas Congressman Kevin Brady on the program talking about the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade and its impact on what you mentioned, the labor participation force, in particular as it relates to women. Here's what he said the true impact of the Supreme Court decision would be.
If you were talking about the economy, certainly the country with workers pursuing their dreams is the stronger economy, no doubt about it. I just don't buy and have not seen any proof that this will discourage labor force participation in any way.
What do you think of his point of view there? And is there data showing the true impact of overturning Roe on women workers?
You bet. So what we actually see is that statewide restrictions on abortion access will take an additional 500,000 women out of the labor force. And you just talked about the JOLTS report, which came out this week, where there's almost 2 jobs open for every 1 person looking for a job. That's not good for employers looking to fill jobs. As well as we will reduce women's earnings by an additional $102 billion. We already have a $512 billion deficit in terms of women's earnings. We are slated to add another $102 billion because of the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
I want to ask you, because even in terms of the amount of education that women get and the types of jobs, whether they're the lower paid jobs, women still don't seem to be getting ahead. When I was looking at some of the data you had on whether or not you have an MBA, whether or not you have a doctorate, still seeing a lot of disparity there. What is it actually going to take to close some of these gaps?
Well, that's a great question, because here's what we have seen. Every year, companies spend $8 billion on implicit bias training, which either doesn't work or sets us back. And in the last 2 years, we've seen a 174% increase in in companies' commitment to equity, and yet we've seen very little progress. What we need to do is invest in solutions like Pipeline, the company that I run, that actually work, that actually get in front of the people decisions that companies are making, like not only pay, because pay is talked about a lot, but also promotion and development and performance, and ensure that every people decision that we're making is actually equitable and in the best financial interest of the company. And very quickly, what Pipeline has found is that that's not only an issue of fairness, it's actually a massive economic opportunity. That for every 10% increase in equity, there's a 1% to 2% increase in revenue. So it's the right thing to do by company shareholders.
And you're leading the way here. Do you need an assist from the government?
Well, that certainly is helpful, no question. But I think if you take a step back, it's really about economic opportunity for everyone. We often talk about equity as an issue just for women or women of color. But in actual fact, we could add over $3.1 trillion to the U.S. economy if we invested in equity. And that doesn't just impact women, it impacts everybody.
Indeed it does. Katica Roy, Pipeline CEO, appreciate you being here. Thank you.